Good day, everyone. My name's Tad Campbell. I'm the Agriculture Natural Resource Agent in Mason County. With me is Philip Konopka, the Agriculture Natural Resource Agent in Lewis County. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the requirements for pesticide record keeping for private applicators. Record keeping is a very important part of the process as a private applicator. Those records that we keep are a tool for us to be able to go back and review on rates and various things like that and what type of response we got with those. But they're also a tool to make sure that we're in compliance, and if there is a problem with someone where you are going to get a visit with the Kentucky Department of Agriculture, that tool is also to provide that you followed the label and followed the protocols on how to apply that product properly. So in the next series of slides, we're going to try to work together and get through those slides to give you a little bit more information on proper record keeping for the private applicator pesticide applicators.
Well, let's take a good deep dive into it, Tad. Let's take a look and see what we got.
Sounds good. Well, Philip, first question that we're going to run into today is why keep records for pesticide applications?
Well, that's a great question, Tad, and we can use it for our past practices because what you sprayed on that crop this year may be fresh in your mind now, but you get 2, 3, 4 years down the road, you have a problem. You may want to go back and look at it and forget what you put on there. So for IPM practices, we can improve our insect, disease, and weed control, avoid problems. I know if anybody's raising a crop of soybeans up in this area, we've got mare's tail, palmer, and water hemp that are causing us problems. So let's try to avoid future problems. And then at the end of the day, what we're doing for is to improve our profits.
Great. And, above all, outside of the effectiveness of the product that we're using, what products do we have available in our area? Because that is a big variation when you start talking, other locations in the state, other states, and things like that, because these labels are state dependent. So some chemicals that producers are using in other states aren't actually labeled or approved for Kentucky and things like that. But the big thing with why we keep records is if there is a complaint, wherever that may come from, that record proves that you followed the protocol set forth in that label so that you did the things that you were supposed to do correctly, and tries, it's just a tool to our toolbox to be able to prove that we did things right, and things like that.
Records are kind of like the crest wrench in your toolbox. There's many jobs available for that tool if the need arises.
Correct. And of course, it's the law. We have to keep records. It's the law, and there's no way that we can get around it. So that's a good overview of why we actually keep records for pesticide applications. And let's get a little bit further into it as far as what is required on those records, okay?
So what is required, Tad?
Well, when we start looking at what's required, there's several state and federal groups that require certain things to be on that pesticide application record. And they vary as far as time that you have to keep those records and things like that. So let's get a little bit more in depth in what each one of these groups requires and how long it is required by that group, and overall what we have to kind of follow to be in compliance. So USDA requires that private applicators must keep records for all restricted use pesticides for 2 years. The EPA, which is part of the Worker Protection Standards, requires that all records of pesticide applications be kept for 2 years. So not only are they requiring restricted use, in addition to they also are requiring general use chemicals as well too. So when you start looking at it, that both sides of the gamut have to be recorded when we apply those pesticides. Now, the caveat to the whole thing is that the Kentucky state law requires that private and commercial applicators keep records for 3 years following pesticide applications. With that number being more restrictive than the federal guidelines, here in Kentucky, we have to keep our pesticide records for a minimum 3 years. If we don't do that, then we're not compliant. So even though USDA and EPA only require a 2-year length of keeping those records, it's really important that Kentucky applicators are keeping those records for a minimum of 3 years.
Don't forget, the USDA and Kentucky Department of Agriculture have legal access to those records.
Correct.
So if they come knocking, you have to provide those.
Correct, and we want to be a willing participation with those groups if they do come asking for our records. So yes, that is really important to know as well too. So hopefully that'll clear up the timeline on how we have to keep, or how long we have to keep records, since different groups require different lengths of holding those records. So when it's all said and done, the one that's the most restrictive, which is the 3 years for Kentucky applicators, is the one that we have to follow.
Correct.
Okay, Philip. What are the record-keeping requirements for the USDA as far as it goes to private applicator records, pesticide records?
Great question, Tad. They're going to want to know several different pieces of information. We're going to want to know the brand name or the product name that's being applied, the EPA registration number. We'll need that information as well. Date, and we need to know month, day, and even year needs to be applied, because like you said earlier, we need to keep these records for 3 years. If you don't put the year down, we can get kind of confused. Location, where are we putting this product down at? What crop are we spraying? And it may be something like a stored product, like stored grain, or it could be a field. Size of the area treated can be in acres. Maybe we've got a high tunnel, need to do a little smaller application. It may come down to square feet. Total amount of product applied. We need to know who applied it and the certification number of that person that applied it.
It's a lot of information just from one organization, but that information is really vital to make sure that if we do have problems with the efficacy of the product that we're using, we've got that information in hand to be able to track that back, as well as the information that we need to know where we put that, how long it took us to get it there, all that good stuff. So a lot of information from that one organization that's required, but nonetheless, some really vital information when it comes to our pesticide records.
All right, Tad, now we've talked about USDA restrictions. How about EPA requirements?
The EPA and the Worker Protection Standards programs do require information as well as part of our record-keeping process. And some of it's the same type of information that the USDA requires. However, there's a little bit that is going to be a little different, or additional information that we need to supply to our records. And in this slide, the bold printed areas are going to be our additional things that need to be recorded on those records, so that we are in compliance with both USDA and the EPA Worker Protection Standards. USDA and EPA both require brand name of the product and the EPA registration number. USDA requires the date of application, but EPA Worker Protection Standards requires the date and time of the application. Location of the application is required by both EPA and USDA. But in addition, EPA and Worker Protection Standards wants to know the active ingredient and the restricted entry interval for that particular product, and they want you to make sure that that's on the records as well. So it's really important that we get all the information we need from both of those entities on our records so that we're in compliance on for both sectors.
Now, you said a very interesting term there, Tad, restricted entry interval, or REI. And basically what that is after we do the application, how long is it safe before we can go back in? If we have to get in before that time, we've got to suit back up with all our personal protective equipment.
Correct. And all the labels, all the products that you're going to apply to your crops in the labeling have an agriculture use section. And in that section, it will list the REI. And basically that is correct. If you've not exhausted that time frame that's listed for that particular chemical, you have to go back into that field with all the required PPE that was required to actually apply that product as well too. Good information. Okay, Philip. So the USDA, the EPA Worker Protection Standards have a detailed list of record-keeping requirements that private applicators must make sure that they get in their records when they're completing those. What do producers in the state of Kentucky have to add or be aware of to be compliant as a Kentucky private applicator?
Don't think they have to add anything. The state of Kentucky requires the same thing as the EPA and the USDA. However, the state of Kentucky does require that the person get it down on paper within 14 days.
Okay, so as an applicator, to be compliant with Kentucky state law, I should have that record completed after application within 14 days, correct?
Correct. And then you need to hold that record for 3 years to be compliant with the state of Kentucky. Now, let's say, for an example, Tad, that you're extremely busy, that busy time of year, and it's hard to get all over everything, and you need to spray, and you need to spray now. So you contact the local feed store to custom spray for you. What's required from that standpoint?
Well, I think, as a farm owner that's requesting commercial applications, I want to make sure that I record the name and address of the person that is providing the service.
Sure.
But as an entity, if I was the commercial applicator, I need the name and the address of the person that I'm doing the service for as well too. So I think there needs to be some interchange there as far as information goes, because as a farm owner, I need to know that that person is certified to be able to commercially apply products, which I would assume, being coming from a commercial applicating outfit, that would be the case. But it's always good to have the name and contact of the person applying anything on your farm. The reason for that is that entity that's commercially applying products to your farm has up to 30 days of the application to get you back a detailed record for your records, so that you can complete a record on that application for your farm. So if there was a chance that someone came looking for that information within that 30 days, you still have that applicator's name and contact information, which will help you through the record process at the time, even though you're still waiting on that completed record for within that 30-day period.
Yeah, that's an excellent idea, to make sure we have that information so we can fall back onto it.
Right. And ultimately, our goal is to provide the best records that we can as private applicators. And by having as much information, even if it's more information than we actually need, but by having as much information as we possibly can have, that will help us stay compliant in our record-keeping process. Okay, Philip. As you can see, we have a template pesticide record-keeping form that producers could use. I say template because I don't think that there is a required certain form that you can use, as long as producers are recording the proper information and all the information that they need to have a complete and compliant record. They can do it on a notebook or anything like that. But UK has actually put this form together, and it actually has the headings to allow producers the opportunity to record all the necessary information that they would need to have a compliant record after a pesticide application.
Yeah, I agree, Tad. This is an excellent form to have on hand. It goes over field number or name, goes over the date of application, along with the day, month, and year, who applied it and their number, what crop or treated area, the size of the area, the product name, the registration number can be put on there, total amount applied, and I love this rate per acre. We've got the per acre, or we've got a blank. If it's smaller than an acre, or an acre doesn't apply to what we're going after, we can fill in that blank as well. Volume of water, how much we apply per acre, and that's going to vary depending on what pesticide we put out. The purpose of the application, we need to remember why we're spraying. We don't want to spray just to simply say we sprayed. Whether it's a general or restricted use, the REI, we talked about that earlier, very important. We can write that down. If we write it down, we're more likely to remember it. The time we did it, and then the active ingredient. And I think we're going to fix and take a deep dive and kind of explain each of these topics.
Yeah, we do have a little bit of a scenario so that we can kind of go through the process of completing this particular form. We do still want to let everyone know that this form is not a required form. It's just a template to help producers or applicators get all the vital information that is required on paper to have a compliant record. So with saying so, we're going to move into a example scenario, and then we are going to discuss how to complete each section of the form. Okay, well, let's take a look at this example. We're going to be using a chemical that is non-existent. It's a facetious type chemical. So we're going to use the label that we have that was supplied to us by our entomologist specialist to use this as an example. A lot of the chemicals, a lot of the labels, the chemical labels that we use from year to year actually can change each year. With updates and things like that. So in this scenario, with it not being an actual chemical, we can use this in our teaching efforts from year to year and not have to worry about things being outdated and possibly get producers in a situation where they're not applying the right amount of a product if we were using just a common name type label for our scenario. So I wanted to make everybody aware up front that it is a false name. It actually does not exist. So, but anyways, we're gonna assume that this is our situation. It's truly kind of an everyday occurrence that we're going to walk through. So today we're going to be treating a 10-acre cornfield for stink bug problems. We're going to use a low rate application of Blastum 2EC. Okay.
It's going to take us about 4 hours to do the job, and you used a total of 200 gallons of diluted spray. When you get finished, it's going to be about 7 p.m., and you're going to use the Blastum to control the stink bugs.
So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through the template that we just showed everyone on how to get all the accurate information that we need from a pesticide label to provide a compliant record for a pesticide application.
I think you brought up a good point. Even if you use the same chemical year after year after year, which you probably shouldn't from a pest management standpoint, but take a glance at those labels each year, because you brought up a very good point that they can change small details every year.
Correct. And those registrations with the states, we talked earlier in our presentation that all chemicals aren't registered in each state. So sometimes there are emergency applications where a chemical can be used in a state under an emergency label, and other situations as well too. But it is really important that we rely back to chemical labels every year, especially when we buy new products each time, because each time we buy that new product, there could be some minor changes with the labeling as it's set forth from year to year for our applications.
All right, Tad. So we've got our Blastum 2EC label here. We've pulled out some very important detailed information that we need for our example.
Right. If you look, you'll see that we have the product label, the container label on the left-hand side of the slide, and then we pulled out a couple excerpts of the labeling materials that were within the package on the right-hand side. And those particular locations in that labeling information are going to give us the information that we need to be able to complete our record and make sure that it's compliant with USDA, EPA, Worker Protection Standards, and Kentucky laws.
All right, so let's take a look at what we got here. We're going to pull out our fancy-dancy laser pointer. Field number. We particularly said BF1. Now, does that mean that every field's going to be called BF1? No. I want you to name that something that you're going to remember for at least 3 years. Remember, we've got to keep these records for 3 years. data application. We did our treatment on March 24th of 2021. Go over to applicator name and certification number. James Henry did the spraying. There's his application number. And we treated corn. The size of the area, if you remember the example, said 10 acres.
So when we continue to work ourselves across that line to get the information that we want, it's asking for the product name, and we're using Blastum 2EC. The EPA registration number, we do not want to make that or mistake that for the establishment number that's on a lot of products. It should say EPA registration number.
That's a very easy mistake to do, so make sure you do get the correct number.
That is true. So make sure that you're recording the EPA registration number, and for this product it was 12-346-67. And on this product, it said that we were using a low rate, and when we refer back to some of our materials, we'll show you in just a little bit of where we got this information, but it was 2.1 ounce per acre was low rate, and we did 10 acres, so that gives us 21 total ounces of the product that we're going to apply on these 10 acres, okay? So we're going to continue on with that, and if you look, here's the trade name that we used, the Blastum 2EC. It asks for the registration number, which is here. This is the EPA establishment number. We do not want that. We want the EPA registration number, which was 12-345-67 instead of, I messed up and put a 6, I think, in that, so I'll have to redo my record. But that was the basic information that we needed at that point in time. Go ahead, Phil.
Keep in mind that the registration number is identified for each individual product. No two products have the same registration number.
Correct. So it's kind of like a thumbprint of the chemical world.
It is.
Your fingerprint of the...
Before you move on, Tad, make sure you pointed to restricted use pesticide, because we'll need to know that too.
We'll need to know that as well. So this is a restricted use pesticide, and we'll show you where that goes on the record keeping form as well too. But we also were discussing rates, and when we started looking at the rates, the actual range for this product for the low end is going to be 2.1 to 6.4 ounces. We are treating stink bugs, which is listed on here, and what we want, and it's for field corn as well. So we did use the 2.1, and that's where we came up with our 2.1 ounces of product per acre to get our total 21 ounces for the application as a whole.
Correct. And our example specifically stated the low rate. That's why we went with the 2.1. If you stay within those ranges, you're abiding by the label, which it means you're abiding by the law.
Okay, so as we continue to move across our form for our record, we go back to the volume of water or carrier per acre, and in the scenario, it said that we used 200 total gallons over 10 acres, so an easy math equation, and we came up with 20 gallons per acre on that. We know that we're treating for stink bugs, and as we pointed out in the last or the slide before the last slide, that it is a restricted use pesticide. So we're going to mark our R for our restricted use pesticide.
Now, Tad, you got REI for 12 hours. I don't remember seeing that on the earlier label.
And it was not, it was in the very first set of labels that we said we were going to use that. This is going to come from your agricultural use section of your label, and the following slide will show a picture of that. So we'll be able to show everyone where we actually found that in the labeling information itself. There's always that agriculture use box, and it has some information in there, but one of the most important things is the REI in that box. So the other thing that we kind of calculated is that in our scenario, we finished up at 7 p.m. We knew it took us 4 hours to apply the product over those 10 acres. So we were basically applying product between 3 p.m. and 7 p.m. And if we refer back to the main label. We'll take a look at that in just a little bit, but this is the active ingredient, duothrin. So again, a lot of this stuff is made up from a product situation, but it still correlates to what we're seeing on actual labels that products that we're using. So let's take a look at the main label again, and here's where we find the active ingredient. It always lists the active ingredient, and we've got duothrin there at 25.1%, and then other ingredients are 74.9% to come up with a total of 100% of this product. Now, we're also going to take a look at the agricultural use area as well, but before we do that,
look up there at the corner, Tad, at the 3A. That's a group, okay? We've got them broke down by herbicide, insecticide, and fungicides. If those numbers are different, we're using a different mode of action. If those numbers are the same, that means we're using the same mode of action. Let's take herbicides, for example, glyphosate. There is a million products that have glyphosate as the active ingredient. Maybe totally different names, such as Roundup Power Max, Mad Dog Plus, Touchdown. All of those are glyphosate products, but different names. So in order for IPM management, we want to rotate chemicals, so make sure we're not just using a different chemical, but a different chemistry type, a mode of action.
Correct. So basically what you're saying, Philip, is we need to look at that group number, and we need to rotate group numbers in our purchasing scenarios, so that we're buying chemicals that do the job we need done, but have different group numbers, so that it breaks up the possible of resistance of weeds to a particular group category that we would continually use time after time.
I don't see any new chemicals coming down the pipe, so we need to make sure we can get what we have on our toolbox effective for several years to come.
I agree totally. And we're seeing a lot more resistance each year, it seems like, with the chemicals that we have at hand. And again, if that is not increasing in number of new chemicals, we need to make sure that we're trying to limit the amount of resistance that we'll see in those chemicals that we have for our use right now. This is the agricultural use requirement box that we were talking about earlier. As you can see, here's the REI of 12 hours that we needed for our record keeping. And again, all your REIs can be found in the agricultural use requirement, along with a lot of other vital information. But the record does require us to put the REI in there if it does have a specified REI.
Correct, yeah. That makes sure if you have to enter the field before that REI is up, you have to resuit up with the proper protective equipment.
Correct. So now we've taken each section of our template for our record keeping to provide the information that we need for each one of the headings to make a complete record that is compliant to USDA, EPA, worker protection standards, and Kentucky standards to meet those record requirements.
And there's multiple lines here. Every time that you do a pesticide application, we need to write it down. If you do a tank mix, meaning that you add more chemicals in than just one, there is room, as you can see right here, for product names that we can add our tank mixes here. We don't have to fill out an individual line per se for every chemical, but for every application, we need to have everything listed.
Correct. So just make sure you get that information down each time that you're applying something to your farm, and also make sure that you're recording that within 14 days. You're keeping those records for 3 years, and that you are taking down all the vital information, no matter what your record template looks like, that you're getting all the information that's required by all those groups to be compliant with your record.
And keep in mind, the Kentucky Department of Agriculture has the right to see these records. So as farmers, we want to be compliant. We want to have everything ready to go for if they do show up.
I agree. Thank you guys for taking time out and gaining a little bit more information about the proper information that needs to be completed for your private applicator pesticide records. And hopefully the templates and the information in this presentation will help you be able to find those things as you move forward and provide those applications as needed on the farm.